We always ask a senior to speak, and I thought it'd be interesting to ask Julius Fox to speak this morning. Julius, as he'll tell you, has an unusual journey to MBA, and it's been a great one and one that I've particularly enjoyed watching. So please join me in welcoming Julius to the stage.
Good morning. I'm Julius Fox, proud to be a senior at MBA. I came here last year as a junior. Though I attended my previous school, one very different from MBA, for 10 years, by the time high school rolled around, I knew I needed a change. I'd always suspected that MBA was the right spot for me. My father graduated from MBA, and though I toured here in 7th grade, I decided to remain in my old school because I was comfortable there and had many friends. My sophomore year, however, I began to feel more out of touch with the school, but I'd convinced myself it was too late to come to MBA. Fortunately, I woke up one day in late April with a lot of clarity and decided to change schools. Although the MBA application deadline had expired 2 months earlier, my father and I contacted Mr. Farrell and Mr. Joya and scheduled a meeting for the following day to see if I could weasel my way in. I ended up being accepted shortly afterward. Now, after those days of quickly applying to MBA, once I'd gotten accepted, I instantly began to wonder if I'd regretted my decision. That whole summer, I had the feeling that I just jumped off a diving board and was holding my breath, anxiously waiting to smack the cold water. Thankfully, when I got here in the fall, it immediately became clear that this was the best decision I've ever made. In the past year and a half, one of the greatest things I've noticed is how strong the bonds are between all the students and faculty members. Now, I'm telling you all this whole story because I want to encourage each of you to start taking risks. I took the risk of switching schools late in my high school career, a choice which ended up changing my life for the better. Today's younger generations have been observed to be much more risk-averse than previous generations. For instance, compared to older cohorts, the millennial generation has seen a noteworthy decline in entrepreneurship. The fear of being judged on social media has also diminished students' willingness to put themselves out there, and as a result, people are much more insular now than they've ever been. While it's good to play it safe sometimes, you'll miss out on all the big payouts, similar to the saying, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. All of you are in a position to start making some big decisions in the next year. Where you go to college, what you major in, what your career will be, all life-defining decisions. While it's important to make good decisions, don't shy away from taking some risk. What makes MBA so special is how strong and supportive our community is. If you take a risk and it doesn't have the desired result, for instance, if you enter a competition and finish in last place, or if in many years from now you start a business that ends up not doing too well, you'll always be able to seek support and fall back on your connections and friendships here at MBA. There are many opportunities offered here. I'm very thankful that Mr. Joya and Mr. Sawyer quickly advised me when I first got here to take advantage of these opportunities. By becoming involved in clubs and teams, I've met and established very strong friendships with many students whom I had not previously known, as well as discovered new interests. Now, in your 3 semesters that you have left here on the Hill, start taking advantage of opportunities that you may not have previously thought about. Put yourself out there and make friends with people you don't know too well. In high school, all of this is a practice run for when we get out into the real world. So start to take advantage of what you have now, because you don't want to be here in a year and a half thinking about all the opportunities that you left on the table. Finish strong, gentlemen. Roll Red.
It's been really fun to watch you, Julius, come to MBA and do what you've done, and I think it's been a very meaningful journey for you as well. Our next speaker is, as you see from perhaps that agenda, a 1986 graduate of MBA. Nick Sieveking is a physician, specifically a plastic surgeon. He spoke at an assembly a while back, and one of his focus at the assembly was fascinating. he talked about this wound program that he developed, sort of remote health care, particularly for prisons around the country. A very interesting entrepreneurial endeavor. And I've enjoyed talking to Nick about his work as a doctor, about his interest in telehealth, and you see some of the things he's done for Operation Smile and the like. But I've particularly enjoyed talking to him about his family, and in fact, he'd rather talk about them and their experiences than anything else. They live out in the country, and he just relishes the opportunities they have on the weekends for his boys to have lots of boys come over and spend the night and just enjoy the countryside. He's just a terrific person, and I'm proud to know him as an alum and as a friend. My wife found this picture yesterday that I was going to give him this morning. He's married to Libby, who's up on my left there. And when we moved here in '94, our children were 5 and 7, and she was one of their main babysitters. So here's a photo of Libby and our children. Join me in welcoming Nick.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Joya, for that gracious introduction, and to you and to the class of 2024, thank you for inviting me to be part of this ring ceremony. After pulling out this ring recently from its safe place, really for the first time in many, many years, several NBA stories from the past and present came to mind, as well as some deeper reflections on what NBA has meant to me through the years. And I thought that's what I'd share with you this morning, a few of these stories and these reflections. But first, we did talk about the meaning of the ring to this school, a little trivia on class rings that I found. The tradition of class rings began at West Point Military Academy in 1835. Back then, as it is now for you guys, the class ring has been a symbol of the hard work, the prodigious commitment, and dedication that you've given to your school. But I think especially here that the ring means a whole lot more. Some 37 years ago, our 1986 class rings arrived in the mail. We had no ring ceremony. No one discussed the meaning of the ring. No one even told us that we should wear the rings on the right hand to make room for a wedding band on the left one day. No one told us that the insignia should be facing backwards towards your heart until graduation, at which time you turn the insignia around to face the world. We just wore our rings as proof that we were about to graduate. So really, it's taken me 36 years since my graduation, having 2 sons now at MBA, and an invitation to speak to you guys this morning, for me to really think about my symbolism of the ring. Hopefully my thoughts can resonate with you guys. All of you have invested countless hours managing the MBA curriculum. We all know that being a student at Montgomery Bell is demanding, and it doesn't slow down. I'm sure most of you at one point have wondered what life would be like at an easier high school. But I'm confident there's not a junior here today that would trade this experience for something easier. But when I see this ring, I don't think about the tests and the themes and all the late night studying. I don't think about me missing the privilege list yet once again by a fraction of a point. Personally, I remember worrying about my future, where I was going to go to college and what I was going to do in life. But also, this ring makes me remember the best friendships that I've ever had. All of you, I'm certain, wonder where you'll be in 2 years, what college you're going to, what your friends will be like, what you're going to study, and in 10 years, what your careers are going to be. When I was at your stage at MBA, I actually knew I wanted to be a doctor, specifically a plastic surgeon. It just so happens that 3 of my very close MBA friends had fathers who were plastic surgeons. Maybe only 3 out of the 12 total plastic surgeons in Nashville at that time. And they were a tremendous resource for me during high school and college. 2, I always felt that I'd be working and living in Nashville one day, raising a family and hopefully sending my boys to MBA. So when I finished my surgical training in California, I moved home. And that's when I met my amazing wife, Libby. She was a graduate at Harpeth Hall in 1994, and if you're doing the math, when I was a senior, she was in 4th grade. Promise you, we didn't meet till I was 33. But it turns out her father had graduated MBA in 1965, and her brother had graduated in 1991. So again, that MBA element just fuels so many life-defining connections for us. So many of these milestones and achievements for me are tied on some level to my time at MBA. And I'm positive that you guys will look back one day and feel the same way. So I mentioned friendships. Perhaps one of your greatest attributes you will have when you leave here is your ability to foster lifelong friendships. As Mr. Joya told you, I do have 2 boys here right now. Bond is in the 9th grade and Cole is a sophomore. And I'm just so grateful to see them having similar experiences as I did years ago. Yes, there are the late nights dedicated to homework and then sports and then back for more homework. But what fills Libby and me with joy are their friendships. As Mr. Joya said, we do live on a farm in Franklin, right on the Harpeth River. And on a typical weekend on the farm, there are 5 to 10 MBA guys just hanging out, shooting guns, fishing and kayaking in the river, building bonfires, shooting off fireworks, and eventually crashing in our basement where Libby has installed bunk beds and sectional sofas to accommodate the crowds. Fun story, a few weeks back on homecoming Saturday, several of the sophomores brought their dates out to the farm after the dance. They built a big bonfire and they roasted something. I don't know quite what it was. They shot off fireworks, and as I looked out from our front porch about 11 o'clock at night, several of the boys with their dates were driving our ATV around the front pasture, chasing my pet Texas Longhorns. And typically, I don't allow chasing my Longhorns, and I'm glad no one got hurt. But I'm sure those dates have an unforgettable homecoming memory. The next reflections I had were about my MBA teachers. You know, I was in school for a long time, 4 years at Vanderbilt in college, 4 years of medical school, and then 5 years of surgical training. But I honestly cannot remember any of my college or medical school professors, not a single name. But I do remember all my MBA teachers and coaches and how they helped me leave MBA with the tools I needed to succeed. A few examples of the many. There was a storied English teacher, Miss Mary Helen Lowry. Miss Lowry, she never gave me above a B on a theme. I thought I was the world's worst theme writer. But I tell you, when I got to college, I never made below an A on a paper. My biology professor was Dr. Nancy Thomas. Dr. Thomas really cultivated my interest in science and encouraged my path in pre-med in college and ultimately medical school. Then there was the legendary football coach, Tommy Owen, who showed us that you didn't have to be big and fast to be champions. I want to share a football story about Coach Owen with you guys today, especially since you'll be bringing home a state championship tomorrow from Chattanooga. This story is about his last bit of coaching advice to me. It was the fall of 1985. We had finished the regular season ranked #1 in the state. We were hosting the Gallatin Green Wave in the second round of the state playoffs here, but we were down 6-3 late in the fourth quarter. We had the ball in Gallatin territory, but wasn't quite in field goal range yet. It was 3rd down and 9. Coach Owen called an inside pass route to me. I was supposed to, from the tight end position, release and settle in deep enough behind the linebackers. Well, I caught the pass, but I came up a half a yard short of the first down. We didn't convert on fourth down, the ball turned over, and we lost the game. As I got back to the sideline, Coach said to me with that unforgettable Coach Owen voice, and there's several of my teammates here today who remember that voice. He said, "Sieveking, you got to run your routes deep enough." Now, I'm sure Coach was totally in the moment of the game, but what a metaphor he left for me that night. You got to run your routes deep enough to create opportunities in life. My final reflection is about my parents and the love and gratitude I carry for my parents for sending me to MBA way back in 1980. My father was a professor at Vanderbilt for almost 40 years, and education to him was the most important priority. And I'm sure private school tuition was a strain and caused many sacrifices in our family, but he made it happen. For elementary school, I attended St. Henry's from kindergarten through 6, and like most of my St. Henry's friends, my dream was to go to Father Ryan and play football for the Fighting Irish football team. Now, I know you guys have somewhat of a rivalry with Ryan these days, but it's really hard to call it a rivalry when they haven't beaten you in over 25 years on the football field. Back in my time, the NBA-Ryan rivalry was the fiercest in town. Before every sporting event, there were fights. Not us, them. Our campus was vandalized, and those beautiful cannons out on the front lawn were always painted purple. So to say the least, the idea of me going to MBA and not going to Father Ryan was difficult. But my parents didn't waver. It's a funny story. On my first day of MBA 7th grade microbe football practice, and we had it down on the front field there on West End, and I'm sure I was still protesting a bit. I wore my Fighting Irish football jersey, that ugly purple thing, and that was a bad idea. The 8th graders really taught me an MBA lesson that day. So it's pretty special looking back almost 40 years and seeing what's happened in my life since my MBA days. But how different would life have been without my parents sending me to MBA? My education, my career, my family, it's really hard to imagine how things could have turned out any better. So in closing today, I want you to know that MBA will be intimately tied to almost every milestone ahead of you. So be on the lookout for those MBA connections. As Julius talked about, spend the next 18 months making more memories with your friends and perhaps making some new friendships before you graduate. Show your appreciation for your teachers and your coaches. I promise you, you will value them even more after you leave here. And finally, when you think about it, thank your parents for sending you to MBA. Again, thanks for having me, and roll red.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate your friendship immensely, and I'm grateful for your speaking here today. So we will now present the rings, and as I said earlier, those of you who are alumni presenters should be over on my right. We'll help you line up. Please do not put your rings on until everyone has received a ring, and I'll remind you about that at the end. And Nick has already told you that while you're a student at MBA, you wear the waffle facing you, and then when you graduate, the waffle faces the world. So if the first group will come up, stand up now, in the first row, we'll begin alphabetically. Emmett Adams.